Warning: the content of these videos contains adult themes which may be distressing. Viewer discretion is advised. No apparent motives, no viable suspects, no timely arrests and no answers. Someone's son, daughter, sister, brother and friend gone but never forgotten. Putting cold cases back in the warmth of the spotlight. Mystery Maverick presents The Unforgotten. Hello everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Mystery Maverick. Unlike my previous cases, many unsolved murders have no suspects, no interviews, no charges have been brought, and very little information is publicly available. This makes it even more important to keep these cases alive and in the spotlight in the hopes that one day the victims may receive justice and their families some semblance of resolution. This is a case that has stuck in my mind since I first heard of it several years ago, and though police have stated that it is not a cold case, after 16 years it remains unsolved. Today we visit Johnson County in the town of Franklin, Indiana, where we travel back to the 24th of July 2006 and the mysterious murders of Blake and Chynna Dickus. The story begins when a young Christina Whitmore met Stephen Sean Dickus, referred to as Sean, who was a member of the Marine Corps stationed in North Carolina. On the 11th of June 1993, the young couple would marry, and 3 years later, upon completion of his duties, they would return to Indianapolis, Indiana. Shortly after they returned, on February the 21st, 1996, the couple would welcome their first and only child into the world, who they would name Blake Michael Dickus. Not long after that, they would build their first home together in Franklin, Indiana. However, this union was not destined to be, and less than 2 years after Blake's birth, Christina would file for divorce along with a restraining order against Sean. Although the circumstances are unclear, the pair would eventually resolve their issues and become amicable co-parents. Following the couple's divorce, Blake would reside with his mum, but he kept in regular contact with his dad. Blake's grandmother has stated that Blake had his own cell phone and would talk to his dad on the phone. As is common in a one-parent household, Blake and Christina shared a close and special bond, and Christina would make sure he had the best of everything. She would always dress him in trendy clothes and even styled his hair for him in a way that only she knew how. According to Christina, Blake was a kind and happy kid and was always smiling. He liked to be funny. He liked to make everyone laugh. He had a heart of gold and he wanted everyone to be happy, she said in an interview for Wish TV. While Blake was an only child, he was part of a large extended family and would spend a lot of time with his grandmother on his mother's side, Carol Whitmore, and was surrounded by many aunts, uncles and cousins. Blake was also extremely close to his grandma, who would watch him while her daughter was working. In a loving memorial to her beloved grandson, Carol remembers watching cartoons with him, laughing at him when he talked like Stitch from Lilo and Stitch, and watching him play his favourite video game Sonic the Hedgehog. Blake loved school and had lots of friends both inside and outside of the classroom. She said his favourite subject was maths and he excelled in it as a result. She further recalls how loved he was by everyone. All of them asked him to come over to play, bought him surprises for no reason, took him to special events, made him feel like he was the most special person in the world, she wrote. Blake was very active, enjoyed riding his bike and loved all kinds of sports including wrestling, basketball and swimming. Like many kids, Blake was a picky eater and was not a big fan of meat. His favourite food was pizza and macaroni cheese, and he loved pancakes and syrup. Blake was brought up as a Christian and would regularly attend the local Indian Creek Christian church with his mum and his family, and would say a prayer before eating and bedtime. He also enjoyed going to Vacation Bible School, a church-organised summer camp where he would join in various faith-based activities with his friends. Although Christina never remarried, Sean would eventually find love again when he met a beautiful and charismatic young lady named China Anderson. China Lynn Anderson was born on January the 22nd, 1980 in Illinois, and was raised by her mother Marsha Anderson in Morrisville, Indiana. According to reports, China was a bright and extremely intelligent child who was in all the high ability classes. She went on to attend Morrisville High School, but would end up homeschooling herself and even graduate early. A true academic with a love for reading, even as a young adult she would continue her studies at Wesleyan University, where she was still attending at the time of her untimely death. By all accounts, China was a friendly and sociable young lady who was dedicated to her faith and regularly attended church. On July 3rd, 2003, at just 23 years old, her and Sean, 7 years her senior, would tie the knot in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. The newlyweds wanted to move closer to Blake and their families, and after a period of renting, settled on building their own home in the town of Franklin, Indiana. Shortly before moving in, the couple would go on a missionary trip to El Salvador with their local church, the Grace Assembly of God. One of China's friends, Lisa Burris, remembers her as a person who always wanted to help and care for others. She recalled China being a true empath, and when she had returned from her missionary trip, she had exclaimed with sorrow, "There are all these kids who have nothing, and we come home and we have everything," Burris said. Nevertheless, on June the 20th, 2006, the pair would close on a house at 1188 Aberdeen Drive, part of a complex of houses that was still under construction. China was a natural homemaker, and she had immediate plans to design and prepare the home and dreamed of becoming a mother. By all accounts, she would have been a great mother, and she demonstrated her maternal abilities by showering her stepson Blake with love. Sean had affectionately nicknamed her Betty Homemaker. Off school for the summer break, having just graduated 3rd grade, 10-year-old Blake had come over to spend the week with them in their new home. In a TV interview, Christina said, "It was a really nice house, and I thought it was a really nice neighborhood. I was happy for them." Earlier in the week, Blake and his father would also spend some quality time together on an outing to the county fair. Just over 1 month after moving into their new home and what they thought would be a new beginning, life as they knew it would come to a horrifying and tragic end for the Dickers family. The morning of July 24th, 2006 was unremarkable and much like any normal day at 1188 Aberdeen Drive. According to police reports, China had called a neighbour around 11 AM that morning to ask if they could discuss water bills before briefly calling her mum Marsha, who she said she would call back later. Blake was due to return home to his mother Christina, who had planned a trip to the movies after she had finished work, and had even thrown in the promise of some candy. In an interview for Crime Watch Daily, Christina recalls talking to her son on the phone for what would be the last time. He was really excited at the time. He said, "Oh, can we stop and get some candy too?" And I said yes. She said that around half an hour later, China had called her and asked if Blake could stay a little longer to have lunch with his dad, who was coming home for his break. Christina agreed, and China assured her she would drop Blake off to his grandmother's house after they were done. Little did Christina know that it was a decision that would change the course of the rest of their lives forever. In the same Crime Watch Daily interview, Christina tearfully says, "I wish I'd have said no, but you wouldn't think anything would be wrong with, him having lunch with his dad." Although there are slight time differences reported, somewhere between 12:45 p.m. and 1 p.m, Sean had arrived home for lunch with his wife. He was surprised to see Blake was still there, as he was supposed to have returned home earlier that day. However, this was typical of Chynna's caring and thoughtful nature. She enjoyed just doing those things that touched people, her friend Boris said. Unbeknownst to anyone, this would be the last lunch the family would enjoy together, and Sean Dickus would be the last person to see Blake and Chynna alive. Around 1:40 p.m, Sean would leave the home and return to work to finish his shift. Sean said in an interview for Crime Watch Daily, "All I remember is rubbing the back of his head and giving him a kiss and, telling him goodbye. I left the garage and pulled out, and Chynna was at the mailbox, and I gave her a kiss to say goodbye to her, and that's the last thing I remember." Meanwhile, Christina's mum, Carol, Blake's grandma, thought it was strange that she hadn't heard from Chynna, and Blake was still not home. She attempted to call Chynna but had no luck getting through. Chynna's mum, Marsha, was also bewildered, as she hadn't heard back from her either. Chynna was usually very reliable, and after a while Marsha had begun to worry. In the meantime, Carol had called her own daughter at work to inform her that Blake hadn't arrived and that she couldn't get hold of Chynna. Christina had advised her to call Sean to find out what was going on. Carol tried calling Sean, who at this time was back at work, but again she was unsuccessful in making contact. Later that day, when Christina had finished work, she headed over to her mum's house to collect Blake for the movies. However, when she arrived, her mum seemed confused and told her, "Blake's not here, Christina. I told you I couldn't get hold of Chynna." Christina, by that point annoyed by the situation, decided to make her way to her ex-husband's home to pick up her son. At approximately 5:14 p.m, Sean would return home from work to collect his books and pick up his wife for night school. According to Sean, he had noticed the garage door was open, which he did not find unusual, as Chynna often left it open for him. However, when he walked in, instead of being greeted by his beautiful wife, he was greeted with an utter nightmare. In a Crime Watch Daily interview, Sean said, "I came home to a horror." "What did you see?" probed the reporter. I'm just going to leave it at that. It was the worst thing imaginable, I can tell you that." According to Sean, he called 911 and then stayed by his son's side until police arrived. Others who lived near the Dickus home have reported that he came outside, threw up and fell to the ground screaming, "My wife and son are dead." Police immediately cordoned off the area, removed Sean from the crime scene and took him straight in for questioning. As police and investigators began working on the crime scene, Blake's mum would pull into the street. As she approached the area, she saw police cars covering it, and she was trying to make sense of what was going on. She realised there was crime scene tape all around the Dickus home and a coroner's van in the driveway. She remembers leaving her vehicle and running up the sidewalk, calling Blake's name when she was stopped by an officer. She remembers that moment vividly. He said, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "I'm Blake's mum. Where's my son? Where's he at? What hospital? Just tell me right now." And he just couldn't even look at me. I go, "Don't tell me that. Where is my baby?" And he just shook his head, and I just fell, she said through deep sobs. A later released search warrant indicated that the crime scene showed signs of a brutal and violent struggle, and there was blood throughout the home. Blake was said to be found feet away from China, and a coroner's report revealed that they had both suffered from multiple stab wounds. In addition, Blake had blunt force trauma to the head and was also asphyxiated. Perhaps even more disturbing is that Blake had fought to get away from his attacker, as confirmed by Christina when she said, quote, "Who would do something to a little boy screaming for his life and trying to get out? Why? All I have to say is why." It has further been suggested by the sister of a neighbour staying at the home close by on the podcast Cold Case Chronicles that as he had tried to get away, that he had grabbed the carpet and that his nails had bent backwards. In a town of around 22,800 people, this crime was unlike anything they had ever seen, and violent crime was far from a regular occurrence. When asked in an interview for True Crime Diary blog site about the impact that this has had on the local community, Borges said, "Tore this place apart." As in any violent homicide, police started by looking closest to home, and Sean Dickus would be the prime suspect. Subsequently, Sean was questioned extensively and even participated in a polygraph test administered by the FBI, which he passed with flying colours. If it wasn't Sean, then who would commit such an horrific crime? Lead investigator at the time, John Borges, has openly stated that the Franklin Police Department have cleared Sean of any involvement in the murders. Police would reveal very little details about the highly classified crime scene. However, it was reported on Fox 59 News that a 2x4 with blood on it was found in the area. This was further corroborated by the neighbour who was staying with her brother at the time of the crime. She said on Cold Case Chronicles that her brother, who was at work at the time, had a trailer out front with the 2x4 wedged underneath, and that police had believed it had been taken from their driveway. The same neighbour claims that a family member who was an officer privy to the case details divulged to her that China had been sexually violated with an object. She further went on to say that the same relative had told her that evidence against Sean was, quote, botched, and that his time card from work didn't line up. Regardless of all the negative judgments surrounding Sean, the same neighbour on a Reddit post titled "Nearly Murdered but Didn't Know It at the Time" detailed factors that lent credence to his innocence. She was at home that day with her newborn baby when she heard a rattling noise at the front door. She went to the window to check if it was her sister-in-law coming home from doing errands, but by the time she had got there it had stopped. Not long after, she had gone back to the living room to finish watching her movie and heard what she thought sounded like a scream, but thought maybe it was the scary movie she had been watching, so ignored it and went back to watching the film. Just a few days after the tragedy, a large group of people would gather outside the Dickus home to pray together for peace. Regardless of the police publicly clearing Sean, the court of public opinion had continued to lean towards him as the perpetrator. Many people in the local community and on social media have questioned his calm demeanour and stoic personality. According to neighbours, Sean was acting, quote, weird and strangely calm outside the home that night, in contrast to Christina, who was hysterical. They even saw the first responders exit the house, quote, gagging. In addition, they found the things he said after the crimes and his religious overtones did not jive with a grieving father and husband. Just days after the murders, he was interviewed by a Fox 59 News journalist who asked him how he was doing. I'm doing well. I get my strength from the Lord Jesus Christ every day. It's hard in the morning when you get up in the morning, but hey, when I wake up, I just start praying for peace, and it comes and it's allowing me to be strong right now. In comparison, Christina, on an interview on Fox 59 News just a week after the murders, was broken and devastated. Uncontrollably sobbing, she said, "I can't breathe, it hurts so bad. It just hurts me the most because the last time I got to see him alive was last Tuesday because he stayed with his dad. I got to talk to him on the phone, but that's it. And I keep clutching onto his animals, trying to smell him." The locals further questioned how Sean could continue living in the residence where his family were brutally slain and after witnessing such terror. However, on a later interview on Crime Watch Daily, investigator Borges reaffirmed their belief that Sean was not involved when he said, "We can tell you exactly who hasn't committed this crime. What we want to be able to tell you is who did." On Saturday the 29th of July 2006, Blake and Chynna's family and friends would gather at G.H. Harmon Funeral Home to bid their last goodbye to the pair. At the end of the service, Blake's family would release balloons into the sky in memory of the little boy. Blake's grandmother Carol recalls an eerie occurrence when his mum had tried to release her balloons. Christina had a large bouquet of ivory white balloons with gold crosses on them, and everyone else had white balloons. Her balloons would not go up. Witnesses everywhere, the huge bouquet of balloons would not rise. She pushed them to go up and they floated over to me, and I held them up and they glided right into my hand. I pushed them back to Christina and they went straight into her waiting hand. Then Christina tried again and the balloons floated over to Blake's cousin Trent, then circled and landed right in front of the open mausoleum where Blake was. Christina still has the balloons. They never did go up in the air, even though they were filled with helium, she wrote. A month later, friends and family of Blake would gather again in a candlelit vigil in honour and remembrance of the much-loved 10-year-old. At the vigil, Blake's family members made a plea to the community not only to remember him but to continue to look for answers and justice. In an interview at the vigil for Fox 59, Blake's Aunt Debbie Brown said, "This makes no sense to any of us, and it doesn't make sense to the community." Gary Whitmore, Blake's uncle, added, "There's a lot of unanswered questions, and that's also why they're having this candlelight service, is so that Blake isn't forgotten. We want the community to understand that, hey, we're still here. We don't want to be put back into the back of the line." He further went on to say of the community, "They're part of our family and we need their help in the most desperate way." Nevertheless, the crime would remain unsolved and no suspects have been identified. However, the Franklin police are adamant that this is not a cold case, and investigators continue to work on it daily. This has entailed following up hundreds of tips and leads to no avail. In the meantime, both Blake's and Chynna's mums would both continue unabated to fight for answers and justice for their children. In a Crime Watch Daily interview, Christina, Blake's mum, said tearfully, "I don't know how someone could do this and continue living with themselves. Why can't they come forward, please? Our family needs justice," she sobbed. Chynna's mother has further echoed this sentiment in an interview with Fox 59 News when she said, "It just can't go unsolved. They were just brutally killed for no reason." Christina, frustrated at the lack of movement in the case, had come across an organisation called the Vidocq Society. The lead investigator remembers her giving him the tip. The family had mentioned to us wanting to know if we had ever reached out to the Vidocq Society in Philadelphia. Quite frankly, I'd never heard of the Vidocq Society, and I've been a detective 25 years. The Vidocq Society is an elite group of forensic experts, profilers and law enforcement specialists across several fields, that work together on one case a month to help solve extremely difficult cold case homicides. After meeting with the group, Borges was advised to take a closer look at a possible connection between a string of unsolved burglaries in the area. After 9 years of holding all his cards close to the vest, Borges was urged by some of the VDOC investigators to release the information to the public for help. Borges remembers a former FBI agent saying to him, "What has it got you up to this point? It's time to get it out." There were 5 unsolved burglaries in all, and one had taken place on the same day on the same street as the Dickers home. Those burglaries, we feel, may be directly related to the Dickers homicides, Borges said. They're all in June or July. They're all daytime burglaries. They're all during the period of Monday through Friday. They all shared the feature of minor ransackings, and various items of seemingly insignificant value were stolen in each of those burglaries, such as bicentennial coins and a Maine Township high school ring from Illinois. Perhaps of even lesser significance was a pitcher full of lemonade and food items missing from refrigerators from inside the homes. Police hope sharing those patterns sparks a memory and a tip. They also all had a signature method of entry, an open window with the screen cut open in a T-shape. Borges has since spoken about this distinctive method of entry in several interviews. "We looked at all our home burglaries. We haven't seen that before, and we haven't seen it since," Borges said. "There's also some evidence we're not ready to disclose, but we feel connects these burglaries very strongly to that. We think that if we can solve these burglaries, we may very well solve the murders." However, police continue to refuse to divulge which factors of the burglaries relate to the Dickers crime scene. They further will not confirm the point of entry, the murder weapon, or the times of death, and will not verify whether China was sexually assaulted or how and if the 2x4 found with blood on it near the home is related to the crime. Police have continued to follow hundreds of tips and leads, and even received a confession from a prisoner in Florida from Indiana who claimed to have committed the murder. After interviewing the potential suspect, they were unable to corroborate his story with the known facts of the case, and it proved to be a dead end. Although China's mother, Marsha Anderson, sadly passed away in August 2014, she had continued her fight for answers. Author Carol Sissom, who was reportedly asked to research the crime by China's mother, had suggested that she knows who the killers are. She has further stated that a group of people, including teenage boys with a history of burglaries in the local area, were responsible for the crimes, and even claims to have a confession from one of them. In an interview with Ronald Hawkins of the Reporter Times, Sissom said, "The boys had a reputation for stealing in the neighborhood. They needed money to support their heroin and cocaine use." In a letter one of the mothers wrote last year, she said she thought the investigation should be turned over to another law enforcement agency, and that the Franklin Police Department had plenty of time to investigate. She further claims that despite passing this information on to investigators and prosecutors, that she has received no response. Christina has remained steadfast in her search for answers and justice, and in recent years has spoken of her fight at the Remember Blake car show in Franklin, set up in honour of her beloved son Blake. This show has further raised funds for the Blake Dickers Memorial Fund and tip line, alongside a $25,000 reward for any tip that leads to solving the murders. In an article on AP News published on July 25, 2018, it states that Blake's mother says his murder remains difficult for her to deal with. She yearns for justice for her son. The Franklin Police Department have not given up either, and just last year, 24th of July 2021, on the anniversary of Blake and Chyna's deaths, they published the following statement. It was 15 years ago today, July the 24th, that a tragedy shook the Johnson County community. Chyna Dickus, 26, and her stepson Blake Dickus, 10, were brutally murdered at the stepmother's home in Franklin. The men and women of the Franklin Police Department continue to dedicate themselves to solving this crime. The FPD Investigations Division has partnered with dozens of local, state and federal law enforcement professionals in the quest to bring the responsible person or persons to justice. Investigators are certain that there is someone who holds the key to this case. Anyone with any information is urged to immediately contact the Franklin Police Department at 317-346-1100. There is a $25,000 reward for a tip that leads to solving these murders. Despite the lack of information available to public, police have stated there is a wealth of great and vital trace evidence. This lack of information has ultimately led to much speculation surrounding this case. Many social media commentators and blog posts still believe that Sean Dickus is the perpetrator. However, I have to believe that the evidence the police have conclusively eliminates Sean of the crimes and implicates an unknown individual. I hope by sharing Blake and Chyna's story that it shines the spotlight on this case and keeps it in the forefront of the public consciousness, so that they remain unforgotten until justice is found. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on who you think killed Blake and Chyna Dickus. Do you think this was a targeted attack? And if so, who do you think was the target, Chyna or was it Blake? Do you think it was someone they knew with a motive, or part of a botched burglary gone seriously awry? Please like and share this video, and join me on the next episode of The Unforgotten.